A partisan interest group seeks to dominate North Carolina's redistricting process. A John Locke Foundation research brief delivers that warning. The author is Dr. Andy Jackson. He is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the Locke Foundation. And interest groups trying to influence the redistricting process, I guess none of us should be shocked about that, but you are drawing attention to a particular group that's trying to play a role that is not quite kosher.
Right. It's normal for interest groups, and of course it's perfectly legal, protected by the First Amendment, for groups to petition the government, and it's also in the North Carolina Constitution for individuals and groups to educate legislatures. That's all fine and good, and so we expect organizations to try to get their people out to these things. There's a particular group, it's called All on the Line, that's a little different because while if you went to their webpage and took a quick look, it looks like kind of your run-of-the-mill interest group that they're supposed to be nonpartisan, even if they may have a conservative or a progressive lean. This organization is actually a wholly owned subsidiary of Eric Holder's organization that is trying to pursue redistricting changes that are in favor of the Democratic Party. If you look at their list of the states they're operating in, places like North Carolina, of course, Texas, Colorado, these are all places where Democrats hope to gain more seats through the redistricting process than they otherwise would. Noticeably absent from this list are states like Illinois and Maryland, where Democrats control the entire redistricting process and district in favor of Democrats. And of course, since that's in favor of Democrats, All on the Line is not interested in trying to oppose that effort in those states.
You mentioned that this group is operating in North Carolina. We'll get back to that in just a bit. But one of the main points of your research brief is the fact that we've already seen evidence of what this group can do from California. Tell us what happened there.
All right. Now, this wasn't All on the Line per se, but this was a Democratic Party effort. What they did is they essentially infiltrated groups, or they got like-minded allies to go to redistricting hearings to testify, to say that they're ordinary citizens not affiliated with the Democratic Party in any way, and they were able to influence the redistricting process in California. There was one political scientist who said that those efforts helped push about 5 or 6 seats, congressional seats, in favor of the Democrats. So what we're looking at is an attempt to replicate what happened in California the last time around in redistricting nationwide in these targeted states, including North Carolina.
Speaking of North Carolina, what do we know about what All on the Line is doing here?
Well, it's kind of a two-phased operation. The first thing they're doing is they're training up folks. They're using some mapping software to try to draw what they consider to be communities of interest. And then during redistricting hearings, they're going to use those to make claims about the maps that are being drawn, state legislative maps and congressional maps. But the real thing is to try to get people to do testimony that these districts are splitting whatever their community of interest is. And of course, communities of interest are ill-defined by nature. They're kind of nebulous. And so anybody can claim a community of interest. But they're trying to get these claims into the record at these hearings so that they can later be used in lawsuits. And they're pretty upfront about that. That's a normal part of their operation, as they've stated themselves.
And they would use these communities of interest in a way that would help skew districts toward Democrats?
Well, that's the expectation. What they've got a whole list. They're working off this program that was written by a group out of Princeton University, and the plan is that the leaders are going to use this maps. They're the ones that are going to be selective. The leaders of All on the Line, North Carolina, are going to be selecting which of these claims of community interests are going to be used against the districts that are drawn by the General Assembly, and those would be used both in testimony, but more importantly for them, later in lawsuits. Their ultimate boss, Eric Holder, has already said he's expecting there to be lawsuits over districts in North Carolina.
Now, the hearings, for the most part, haven't taken place yet. We've had some public hearing on criteria, but not on maps or how to group communities together. Once these hearings take place, how would we know, or how might we suspect that someone who is speaking is part of this?
Right. The one thing we may know is if they're affiliated with a particular group, All on the Line, or another group, because generally at these hearings they ask, are you affiliated with an organization? There's no requirement that you have to say that. Of course, we have a First Amendment right, not to have compelled speech to say who we're associated with if we don't want to say that. But one of the clues you could look for, well, the main one, is if you're seeing people use particular claims of community of interest backed by these maps, and the maps they use generally have these little blue fields that note the community of interest. So if they're doing testimony, they're holding up a map with a little blue field on it showing parts of their cities or their counties, then that is probably somebody using the program from Princeton University to draw maps that has been encouraged by All on the Line.
This sounds like a very organized effort and part of a campaign to help Democrats maximize advantages with the new North Carolina maps. How should we use this information? What's the benefit of exposing what's happening with this group?
Right. Once again, these folks have every right to do what they're doing, party organizations as well as interest groups. It's good to know for a couple of reasons. One, to help legislators when they're figuring out maps to kind of figure out, well, what is a real genuine local concern and what may have been brought on by this interest group. But I think it's really more important to have a note in the record for when we do get, in all likelihood, to litigation related to these lawsuits, to these testimonies, that this is in fact a plant, an organized effort by this Democratic organization.
Well, as this process moves forward, we know that one person who will be watching very closely and looking for signs that speakers are tied to All on the Line is Dr. Andy Jackson. He is director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. You can find his research brief with the headline, Partisan Interest Group Seeks to Dominate Redistricting Process at johnlocke.org. Thanks so much.
Thank you.